There we go. You're started.
Session
Less than
6.
one page.
Pastor Lisa, did you want to make an announcement?
She's going.
Well, I told Mary that I had, if they don't pick up the printed practicum sheet this evening, it is posted at under the featured, pinned to the featured items on the classroom group page. If anyone is not present or needs another sheet, although I think there's like 5 or 7 different ministry opportunities there. And then what I was making clear to a couple folks on the break was that you don't have to have all 6 of your hours. Well, I'm just sideways. You don't have to have all 6 of your hours of practicum by next week. Although if you do 6 hours a month, it's a lot easier and you're not playing catch up. That you have to do 6 hours per month for a total of 18, and the totality of practicum is not due until the last night of the 3rd class. Another thing that I clarified was that there is an exam each month, once a month. The curriculum that you have now is only for this month. There is another curriculum for the 2nd and the 3rd month. So you definitely, and this is a longer curriculum for some of the classes that we have. So you definitely need to review that curriculum very well. Okay?
That being said, the last night of the 3rd month is October 25th. So
Yes,
18th.
and also, there's 5 weeks in August, and the last week we do not have class because that's the Monday and Tuesday of Labor Day weekend. So if you go out and party on Monday for Labor Day, you can rest it off Tuesday.
Labor Day weekend, September 5th.
Yeah.
Okay, well then, I was wrong. I thought somebody said it was that same weekend.
No, Labor Day is September 5th.
Okay, well then,
Did you say
either
that
way,
right?
there's no class the 5th week of
No
August.
class August 30th.
Okay.
We can do all of our hours that day.
Chris did, wait a minute, Chris had a question.
Well,
But
it was
don't wait
about,
till
it was
the
about
last
the
minute,
hours. I was
Because
just gonna
the whole
ask if,
point is that you're doing this in sincerity to minister to someone else.
Okay,
So, and
Then-
we can talk about that a little bit more next week as well.
okay, Chris, go ahead.
yeah, it was just about, so, I guess, Lisa McAllister wanted to ask if, serving on the baptism team, like I have just started serving on the baptism team, if that could be used as my,
Pastor Lisa Suter, can the baptism team for Chris Ellis he just started on, can that be used for his
Yeah,
practicum?
the main thing is that you're interacting with other people in some way, even if it's simple service,
right,
that you're interacting with other people. I did say that the worship team or the prayer team, you're not really interacting with people so much. So to try to step outside of your comfort zone, but you could even serve as a door greeter, and it's about breaking people that have not yet gotten many opportunities to start to minister outside not only their comfort zone, but their normal routine.
Everybody got it?
Yes.
Okay, we are ready for session 2 and 3. Mike, go ahead.
Obviously, Pastor Wes, a hard act to follow.
Right.
Yeah. So we're just gonna kind of trudge along as best we can. Picking up where he left off on page 54. This is options available to the counselor. Part of being a chaplain is you're going to have to be very observant of people. You're gonna have to pick up on things that maybe their body language, maybe unspoken signals that if you're not really looking for, you could miss. There will be questions you'll need to ask to pull information out of them. It goes way beyond just ministry of presence, okay? Being a chaplain, you're gonna have to interact with them and find out what the issues are. Some of the options it's talking about are what I just alluded to, observation and physical facts, like they're crying. You can use a seem to be response. This goes beyond the observation and comment and relies on the mild interpretation of what you observe, okay? If somebody's having difficulty speaking, they're physically shaking, or you can use a statement such as, "You seem to be upset today." And that kind of helps break the dam and gives them the freedom to then start expounding on what the problem really is. Number 3, I statements response. Two examples of that would be like one statement of your own feelings, and the other one expresses interest of or wondering. I'm wondering if you're ready to accept. The tell me about response. Tell me about the reason for your visit today. Sounds and grunts, these are your nonverbals. It may be an O, an or an uh-huh. And then of course, body language, raising an eyebrow, slight frown, nonverbal clues that you want to respond to. On page 55, it goes into social and pastoral conversations. A social conversation, somebody give me an example of it.
Talks about the weather.
Talk
a lot
about
of rain this week.
your family, your kids.
Yep.
How's your mama doing?
Yeah.
What are these doing?
Breaking the ice, really.
Yeah, you're establishing a congenial atmosphere,
Making them comfortable.
making them comfortable, being pleasant and positive.
They're safe topics
Mm-hmm.
at the moment, yeah.
Yeah, non-inflammatory,
Right.
or hopefully they're not inflammatory. Yeah.
Some of the things you want to avoid in those situations would be religion, talking about the differences between theology or between churches, services. You don't want to bring up the past. How about pastoral conversations? What do those concentrate on?
The person you're with.
Mm-hmm.
That's when you're actually building the bond with them, right? So like you're actually letting them know that you're showing your empathy towards them, right?
You could think of it as the icebreaker phase.
And I was gonna say also, you can invade those tough conversations as well, in those uncomfortable situations, like you're welcoming and you're allowed to invade in those like, I don't know what I'm trying to say, but an uncomfortable situation is welcome in those situations.
Yeah, because not everybody's gonna be real open immediately to just pouring their heart out in a chaplaincy situation. You know, you've gotta remember they're a little traumatized because they've just endured something, okay? Which is the whole reason that you're gonna be talking to them, right? So they're uncomfortable. So we have to get past all that and make them feel at ease. These are some of the ways that we can do that and break the ice and get them on a level where they're more open and ready to talk.
Yeah, cause if we're talking on a level like what, so if like we're at the church, you know, odds are somebody probably sought you out to go and talk to you, you know, but if you're working as a chaplain for the fire department and a firefighter just has suffered a traumatic event and they're making him go and talk to the chaplain before they clear him back for duty, it might be different from him wanting to open up compared to somebody in the church actually trying to seek you out for the conversation.
Right,
True.
and in that situation, you've got to lead them
Right.
Yes.
to get to the information you need.
Okay, so on the opposite side, my house did burn down, and with that, the fire marshal, they say, do you want a chaplain? They didn't really give us a yes or no, like, here's a chaplain, talk to them. like in that moment, our home is still burning, like it's smoldering, you know, we had nothing but what we went to work with that day, nothing but 2 diapers in our babies, our under a year old baby's diaper bag. So the chaplain comes up and like, let me tell you this, how's the weather is not gonna do it. I'm not gonna be able to get past the stench of smoke because you asked me how the weather is. And then even so, well, how are you feeling? The person's not gonna know how they're feeling in that moment. They're not gonna be able to really tell you how they're feeling in
Right.
that moment. So
Yeah,
You're gonna
that's a
have
case
to
where
wait.
you need to know what resources are
That's
available.
the difference
Yes.
between a
Needing.
crisis situation and a normal day-to-day visit, and
Mhm.
you're absolutely right. If somebody, comes and they're already in tears, or they're currently in the middle of a crisis, or they're at the hospital and somebody just died,
Mhm.
clearly crisis delineates the normal, everyday greeting. So hopefully he did not just say, hi, how's the weather? He knew what was going on already and that y'all were in crisis, at which point he needs to step into intervention mode and problem solving mode right away. And that's why we have the 2 different levels of the counseling classes, where one of them is how to deal with a crisis versus long-term problem solving.
That's good. But no, he was like, how's
Just
the
for
weather?
clarity, neither of those things will fall into chaplaincy, correct? Like the counseling side of it.
No. And I don't
But we're
think
not
that in that
counseling.
moment, it wasn't, I didn't need a counseling session. You know, and I don't feel like he was trying to be a counseling. What I needed was, like you said, I needed resources, like
Yes.
where are we gonna stay tonight? You know, I need
Where am I gonna
something
get
for the
food for
United
my
Way.
baby?
I need the number to the Red Cross. I wasn't needing to find, I was needing Jesus in that moment, but I was needing, you have to meet a
Physical
person's
needs.
basic needs
Yeah.
before you can go into
Yeah.
anything else, because they're
So
not gonna
true.
hear you talk about Jesus if they're worried about where are they gonna sleep tonight.
It's like trying to
You know,
feed
That's
to a hungry
exactly
person.
why the whole ministry practicum is more about the initial practical need of the human or the person, and not about giving them a sermon. In the context of the church, the main thing we need to remember is, if we're working under a covering of a church, that our counsel must be godly, but of course it has to also be practical.
Right.
Exactly.
You gotta catch a fish before you can clean it. And if somebody's hungry, even the book of James tells us, don't tell somebody be blessed and on your way when you're
Right.
sitting there and they're starved and naked. And for the moment, with all of your house, in smolders, you were unclothed and naked and hungry, and you needed immediate help. So for a chaplain to come, of course he needs to meet your basic physical needs first and give you resources for help. But then if you had a longer term relationship in that instance, then the jail chaplaincy is a perfect example of, you have to build that rapport first, because you're gonna be going long term and ministering to people more often than a crisis situation. You may just see a chaplain one time in the hospital or in a fire or a police emergency situation, but if you're doing the work of a chaplain in a long-term setting, you may be dealing with long-term problem solving. And of course, the first problem, once you build that rapport of trust, the first problem to be resolved is gonna be the need for Jesus. So yes, it's both sides of the coin, absolutely. And that was a very good point to bring up, Amanda.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Moving forward.
On page 56. Clergy and client privilege, and Pastor West touched on that a little bit. Understanding the differences of the covering. And understanding that you can't make an automatic assumption of privilege when serving in a volunteer capacity. because that agency may not enjoy the understood protection of privilege. Are there any states that guarantee absolute immunity?
No.
No.
I don't know about that.
There's not.
According to here, it's not.
There's not. Attorney-client relationships that's in a legal realm, and we're not. Okay, so what Pastor West was talking about, like the sanctity of the confessional, that's of course for the Catholic Church. It explains a little later on that if you don't take notes, they can't be subpoenaed. So where does that privilege end?
If you're doing it for the church, you're covered under the church from what you were saying earlier, correct?
Mm-hmm.
If you're in an agency, you would have that ecclesiastical covering that he was speaking about.
Well, if you're working in an agency, you're bound by their rules and regulations.
Whatever their regulation is, which it might differ from agency to agency.
Exactly. What happens for a police department may differ from a hospital or jail or some other area of chaplaincy. So that's where you've got to know, what the boundaries are in that regard. How is the client clergy privilege understood by the agency you serve? Well, if the employees of that agency believe that the information they tell the chaplain is immune from exposure, they're believing a false impression. All information given to the chaplain is subject to subpoena by court if deemed necessary.
Or are they supposed to, is the client supposed to be made aware of that before they go into, you know what I mean?
Well, I know the next sentence a couple of sentences down, it says if it looks like that the individual that's being counseled is going to, compromise their self, you are to let them know that anything that they tell me, I am
That makes sense.
needing to report it.
Exactly, and what I talked about earlier was what number C talks about, issues about note-taking and tape recording. Okay, community service chaplain ministering in the workplace must know her legal rights regarding note-taking and recording during counseling session. In addition to the potential of the chaplain being subpoenaed to court for testimony, all notes and recordings pertinent to the case given and which are in possession of the chaplain. It is therefore advisable that community service chaplains refrain from note-taking and or tape recordings unless absolutely necessary.
But in the capacity that we would be doing it in, we would fall under what Pastor was telling us.
The ecclesiastical
Unless we go to work for an agency.
Okay.
right.
If you go to work for an agency, then you fall under their covering and their rules.
Okay, I have a question about this, just cause I'm a little confused. I feel like, okay, so we have a jail ministry here at my father's vineyard. If you join this jail ministry, are you under the church or are you under the jail, the Escambia County, whatever? Do you have to go by their regulations or ours? So if we're talking to a convict and they're telling this stuff and then they get, I don't even know how the judicial system works, I don't know, they have to go to trial. Does our notes, if we choose to take notes, does it fall under the church stuff or the jail stuff?
Church.
The church,
Both.
because we are working for the, well, not working, but we are through the church,
Both,
but you're in
because
an outside building.
I'm gonna say both because I led the jail ministry for a couple of years. And you're cleared by and badged through the jail. Okay,
So
not the
it's
church.
like working for an agency,
Right, so you're under both.
okay.
You're going to the jail under the church's covering.
So the only time that we are not required to is if we are going as a ministry for the church, not to a specific place. If we are going out for hospital visits or for just whatever, you know.
So Mike, you wouldn't have that, that ecclesiastical act in that,
In the jail.
No.
In that
No.
situation.
No,
Because
you're
you're
under the church's
just signed
authority,
in under
I
the
mean,
jail.
the jail's authority.
Okay,
So
So
if you're in-
if you, well, number one, you would have been taught not to sit down and discuss a case with an inmate, okay? If you did
Yeah.
that, then absolutely, anything you take notes or whatever, and it's absolutely subpoenable.
so you're going in there and you are just having generic conversation with them, not anything, not generic, but not relevant to their case.
Typically, what you're gonna do is you're gonna address a group of people, and you're gonna teach them about the Bible, and you can teach them about Jesus. You're not gonna be talking to them really about, you can give your testimony, but you're not gonna be talking about anything that's relative to why they're in there.
You're keeping the focus Jesus-centered at
Yes.
this point, not all
About
the
their
other
cases.
stuff that I really,
Right.
Because
yeah,
we're not the counselor.
Right.
Right.
They're the
True.
counselor.
We're not,
true,
we're not the lawyers and.
Now, do y'all find it hard to keep it on Jesus whenever y'all go out and do this? Not necessarily in jail, but any situation that y'all done? Because do you find it to where people are wanting to, like you said, be in a counseling situation, they have just things that they wanna talk about and they just keep getting off the subject? And if you find yourself in that, okay, this is more of a counselor need, how do you excuse yourself from the conversation? Because I wouldn't wanna violate anything that we're not supposed to be doing, but how would you, I know that he said, I don't think that this is, you know, you would just, how do we end the conversation
Okay.
without them being hurt, you
Okay.
know?
You're gonna have to, when you're put in a position and you're acting as a chaplain, you're going to have to assess that situation, okay? How are they acting, what are they saying? And based on the interactions that you have with them, then you'll pretty much know how you need to proceed, on what level. And if it gets into they're needing a counselor, then, you know, you're gonna refer them to a counselor.
Okay, and then you just say, have a good day? I mean, see you later?
Well,
That's what I'm
no,
saying,
you
like,
can
how do you?
Peace out.
Yeah, hope it works out.
No, I mean, there may be a time where they need medical attention,
Okay, so
or
you're
they
gonna
need
just
psychological
use
help.
your tools that you have to, if they're sitting there, they need a counselor, but they don't have a place to stay, then you're gonna use that, give them a resource to find a place to stay. Okay, so you just do what you can and refer them out.
Yeah, you
Okay.
use all the tools you have
Okay.
available to you.
Gotcha.
Well, that's the reason why Pastor said to know your depth, know where you're at.
Service to try to advise beyond your knowledge, education, or expertise.
Right.
It's, you'll receive much more respect in the long run to say, this is beyond my expertise or experience, and you need to see a professional counselor, or I need to refer you to someone that can do, you know, recovery. I've never been a drug addict, so I don't have a level of experience or expertise in addiction recovery, but I know who does.
Right.
And one of the resources that we make available is that, I just went blank, Mike, what's it called, the Street Survival Guide?
It is,
Yes, you know, that's one of the resources that we try to stay updated on, and Mike does very well with that. And you need to know what other resources that you can refer people to, and have the humility and the wisdom to know your own limitations.
that's what Nancy was saying, referring back to what Pastor Weston said.
Yeah, and I
Yes.
definitely understand and agree with that. I think that I get caught up because I think it's more of a personal look at it. If something's going on with me and someone tells me, you need professional help, like, I'm gonna be a little offended, you know? So it's not the reasons why so much as what you would say.
How you would handle it.
Yeah.
How big?
I mean, honestly, I think,
But, it really is about respectfully telling people that you, just like
This
when,
is out of my
you know,
league.
there've been plenty of times when in class that somebody asked a question and I said, Well, I haven't studied that. I don't have the list of verses available. Let's come back next week and I'll refresh my study on it. It's okay to say I don't have the answer, but you're not literally going, okay, well, I'm out of here, peace out.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say, I don't think you just abruptly just
In
end
every scenario,
the
you're not gonna leave
session.
somebody in the lurch.
Okay.
I think that a lot of times you can pray with them. Is it all right if I pray with you right now before I leave?
Well, you could, yeah.
You
Well,
know,
I can speak.
can I
Go ahead,
interject
Ken.
something on this? Most of the time, if it comes down to where they need canceling, you know, those people already know they need it, and they're looking for somebody to confirm it.
Right,
You know,
okay.
cause that's what's happened to me every time I've had to go into, you know, a canceling session.
Because I'm not gonna argue with anybody, not argue, but I do not have the nature or the spirit to be a counselor. Like, I will hurt your feelings in some type of way, I'm just too,
Sometimes you gotta
I
hurt
want
people's
to give
feelings
you the
to
resources
counsel,
that you
but
need, I
you're
wanna
not
pray
that.
for you, I wanna tell you Jesus, but I do not want to get into the counseling thing, so that whole, don't be a that's irrelevant for me, because I'm never gonna be that, like, I'm never gonna try to be that.
You could just,
But-
easily say, I can get you references on
Mm-hmm.
people you can talk to
And
about
who
this.
would we,
Yeah.
okay, so through my father's vineyard, who would be our reference? Who would we say we would call who? You know,
That's a good question. Like, do we have like a?
like if they're pregnant, obviously the pregnancy center, but, you know,
Well,
there's other.
That's where we need that.
Street survival guide, yes.
Yeah.
Let me try to put it in context a little bit.
Mhm.
As a law enforcement officer, we would go to situations, domestic violence, child abuse, animal abuse, assaults, you name it. And we had to go in there and we had to assess the situation as quickly as possible. And a lot of times, we had to determine that somebody was in shock, okay? And if that was the case, they're not gonna be rational. They're not gonna know what to do.
No.
So we had to know how to coax them along easily while putting them with the people they needed to have help them.
Okay, so
And a
we're
lot
a
of times
referral
that would be
source,
the family.
basically.
Yeah, and that'll come to you,
Mhm.
you know.
Yeah, okay, I just didn't wanna, that kinda scared me about the whole you're not a counselor thing, and I'm like, what's the line? Because I don't want to be, mistaken if Kathy is going through the hardest time of her life, and she says this is so hard, and I agree with her, and I pray with her, or whatever, is that counseling? Because I don't, I guess I don't know.
No.
That's
Like
not what
Pastor
it
West
is.
said, know your
But
dad.
Yeah.
the thing is, when you do that, you said, I have a list of resources.
Yeah,
And we need to look at those for you.
Okay,
You know,
gotcha.
You get what I'm saying?
So we're just a referral source,
I hate
we're
to
prayer
say-
and a referral source, okay,
Yeah, you
that
know,
makes sense.
you
The
gotta
ultimate referral.
pass the buck on that deal.
Okay, gotcha.
but Chris, you had something?
Yeah, I was just gonna give a different perspective on it, yeah. So before I, really started living this Christian life, I spent many a day as an inmate, and so,
Many of days.
yeah.
Thank you for
We all
your
got
truth.
I've spent some time locked up.
There's
And
notes.
so, when the opportunities came, when somebody would come into the jail, we already knew what the deal was, they were coming in there to minister to us and stuff, and 9 times out of 10, when those moments came up, most everybody that's locked up, they just want somebody to talk to.
Yeah.
Right? Because number one, they're around the same people every single day, and they're, you know what I mean? And that person next to me is not a reliable source to, I don't wanna tell him my stuff anyways, you know what I'm saying? So, right, so really, in that moment, I'm really looking for someone to give me just a little bit of guidance, like in a situation, and really just somebody that's gonna just take a little time to listen to what I have to say.
That's the
Yeah,
That's good.
and that's just really it, you know what I mean? Besides, I'm not looking for some deep theological answer to like this, thing, cause I've got a whole lot of, I'm worried about my kids right now that are out there, how my wife's paying the bills, I just lost my job, nobody's paying my car note, you know. These are the issues that I'm going through while I'm locked up, so I'm not trying to figure out all this, you know, these other things, so I need somebody to listen to me and be like, just listen to me for a second, you know what I mean? Because on top of my court case coming up, I just lost everything in my life, and I'm scared that even when I get out, I don't even know what I'm going back to, kind of deal, you know? Regardless of whether it's their fault or not, you know what I'm saying? It's still an issue. Like, if you decided to come into that jail to speak to them, then I'm not gonna be judging them based upon why they're in there, you know what I'm saying? If you did that, then you didn't need to go in there in the first place, right?
Exactly right.
Yeah, so.
Can I say something?
Sure.
Okay, so, even listening to Pastor Wes, you know, when I first started this, because of, my job, I dealt with a lot of death, and I've dealt with a lot of, families. So, whenever I started this, I was like, you know, this is something good for me to have because it will help me in those situations because I was already in those situations. It was when I started actually taking this class that I seen how far it went way past the level that I deal with on a daily. So, what I have seen is that we, like Pastor West said, you don't have to have a card. You don't need to show them, hey, look at me. We already are doing this ministry and listening to others when they need to hear us. We don't need a card for that.
Right.
You know, we don't need a degree for that. This right here is helping us to be better at listening. And when I was just reading some of this, and then whenever Amanda was saying that about, you know, whenever you go in, what do you say, all of that, I'm taking it in as though we're not just going to get this and be thrown into the lion's den. You're going to have almost kind of training because you'll have someone with you. And so going into whatever ministry that you're wanting to go into, you're going to learn still. Like, this is just the beginning. Right?
Exactly.
Think of it as an overview.
Make this summary point. A chaplain is a listener and a liaison. You may liaise between that person and God under the covering of a church, or you may liaise between that person and other outside community resources under the covering of the agency for which you're submitted. But a chaplain is not necessarily a counselor, but a counselor should always be taught how to be a chaplain. And that's why those of you who are counseling degree candidates, this is one of the required courses that you take as a counselor, because you need to understand how to liaise outside of just preaching or teaching or testifying, because you've got to know how to meet practical needs as well. So forget about the word counselor when you're learning about being a chaplain, because you just focus on being a listener and a liaison. But if you are pursuing the ability to be trained and to walk in the shoes of a counselor, then of course you're going to have all this other biblical foundational teaching and other counseling classes to teach you how to give godly counsel under the unction of the Holy Spirit. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, absolutely.
And what this course is doing is it's teaching you, it's giving you an overview, it's teaching you about things to look for, things to listen for, and how to recognize certain things. Like section 2, the next section, we're going into the chaplain and stress issues. I do want to emphasize that you really need to read this, pay close attention. If you have time, reread it. And now that you have your book, read that. And it's like Pastor West said, if something strikes you and you don't understand it, you want to know more about it, go deeper. Take that upon yourself. Find resources to dig deeper. You can even do that in a word search. Some of this is going to be of a clinical nature as far as psychology terms, medical terms. We're going to go through acute stress syndrome, delayed stress syndrome, cumulative stress syndrome. We learn how to understand these principles. Number 1 on page 59 is assimilation. And that's where you're saying if it has 4 legs and a tail and stands in a pasture, must be a cow. Well, using that logic, if I have a headache, I have a brain tumor. Right? So if you read the next example, the father of a young child teaching his kid about, turns to a picture of a cow and tries to explain what the cow makes the moo noise. Then they go down and he's got 4 legs and a head and a tail, and it's teaching the child what to look for to identify this animal. Therefore, if a man or woman has been told that severe headaches are a symptom of a brain tumor or an aneurysm, they will most likely respond emotionally. Their body will respond physiologically to what they believe is the truth. The emotional and physical response will continue until the person has learned how to categorize, which is the next section on page 60. So what is categorization?
Actually 59 in our books.
Yeah, it's 59 in our book,
59.
Number 2 categorization is
59 on our books.
because we're supposed to have the same book. It's 60 on ours,
Yeah, it's 60.
Not ours.
60 on mine and Mike's. It's not 60 on yours. It's
I don't have the teachers, I have a regular.
We're missing out on a whole page of information.
Nah.
He's ready to fight over there. Ours is at the top of 60. Is yours at the bottom of 59?
It's,
No.
no,
It's about,
What do you have at the top of 60?
yeah.
I'm just gonna write 60.
60 is.
at the top of 60, it's PTSD.
And then it goes into it.
Get under 60, turn the page and carry on.
There we go.
There
All right.
you go.
Yep,
All right, let's talk about categorization. The ability to take the generalities of a subject, that is a person, place, thing, or concept, and identify the specifics in order to identify a term and consideration. I'm not gonna read the italicized part of that because you need to. Part B of that is post-traumatic stress disorder. If you'll notice in very bold letters under this topic, it says, it has a disclaimer of sorts. It says, PTSD is a pathological disorder. One critical incident stress event can produce enough stress responses in the body to forever change the brain. Then it goes into the chronology of the pathology is as follows, and it lists 12 items, such as number 1, the event, physical symptoms number 2, 3 emotional symptoms, 4 cognitive dysfunction, 5 hyperarousal in all categories, 6 fear of repetition, 7 recurrence of event, flashbacks, dreams, 8 symptoms must last longer than 30 days to be diagnosed, and 40% of people with physical trauma will get PTSD. Number 9, 50% of sexual assault victims will get it. Incest victims, people who witness torture, and 90% of torture victims get PTSD. In principle, there's 3 types of stress. to which all people will respond. You see that? Okay, they are general stress, eustress, and distress. Somebody read number 1 for me.
General stress?
Mm-hmm.
General stress affects everyone. The everyday routine and mundane tasks are only accomplished because of a certain amount of tension that allows us to determine the value of the task at hand. That is, whether or not these tasks are urgent, important, unimportant, etc. General stress is often not considered stress, and that it is so commonplace in everyday life.
Anybody ever have any stress on the job?
Post office.
Yeah,
What about, that would be a general stress, what about next week for the final? Would that be considered a little general stress?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Well, these are examples of the general stress, right?
Amanda said it wasn't, but it is now.
It is.
I was feeling pretty good.
What about eustress? This one I thought was kind of cool. And it says there that this is a type of stress that you might consider good. The Greek prefix eu means well or good. So eustress initially may or may not be perceived as stress, all because generally people do not think of good things which happen to them as being stressful. But let's say that you get a promotion, you get put in a higher tax bracket, and so that's a good thing. You got the promotion, you got the raise, now you gotta pay in a higher tax bracket. So is that necessarily a good thing?
Win the lottery.
Well, okay, let's look at that. Lottery, that most people that win the lottery are broke again within 5 years. Is that a good thing? No. Okay. So too much of a good thing may not be.
Right.
All right, what about distress? What is that?
Negative aspect.
Negative aspect. It says that can be confusing, and no one is immune to physiological, psychological symptoms are the results. The next section is critical incident stress, or CIS. This results from trauma or a series of traumas. This could be a battery of physiological or emotional symptoms, okay? A victim of stress experiences these symptoms that they are in fact normal responses to abnormal circumstances. Now, as a community service chaplain, we should be informed and educated to recognize a large number of the symptoms which accompany CIS, such as 1, shock, 2, nausea, 3, sleep disturbances, hyperventilating, withdrawal, suicidal thoughts, cynicism, time distortion, and problems with authority figures. These are all part of CIS identification. How about adrenaline, epinephrine, and other body chemicals? Like I said, in law enforcement situations, you have to look for this kind of stuff. So as a community service chaplain, we need to understand, at least to a little limited degree, the dynamics of body chemistry. Such as adrenaline or norepinephrine, and these affect the feelings of the body. And it includes emotions such as anger, fear, and joy. So it's good to have a little understanding of all of these aspects. The fight or flight response. Most chaplains will have at least an elementary understanding of this, and it's triggered by the adrenal gland. So that's where we're starting to learn a little bit about the body chemistry and medical. Somebody read what the adrenal gland is.
Either of two small dissimilarly shaped endocrine glands, one located above each kidney, consisting of a cortex, which secretes several steroid hormones, and the medulla, which secretes epinephrine, also called the suprarenal gland.
And epinephrine, a hormone secreted by the adrenal medulla that's released into the bloodstream in response to physical or mental stress, as from fear or injury.
No, Colonel.
What?
I'm sorry, they did it. You, somebody said something, but I said,
What was
no,
it?
Colonel
The
said.
medulla oblongata,
Yeah.
okay, okay.
I'm sorry, reel it back in.
All right, so what does epinephrine do? Somebody read what epinephrine does.
It's, the A part?
Yeah.
A hormone secreted by the adrenal medulla that is released into the bloodstream in response to physical or mental stress, as from fear or injury. It initiates many bodily responses, including the stimulation of heart action, an increase in blood pressure, metabolic rate, blood glucose concentration, also called adrenaline.
Okay. You ever experienced that rush of adrenaline and what it does to your body?
Mhm.
How you feel when that happens?
That's when old ladies can pick cars off of grandbabies, pick
Yep.
up cars off
Absolutely.
of grandmothers.
Absolutely. In stress situations, you're gonna see that.
So you get the dome.
The adrenaline can be very, very powerful. I'm not going into B, the white brownish crystalline compound, CHNO, synthesized and used in medicine as a heart stimulant, vasoconstrictor, and bronchial relaxant. Okay. The bottom line is that the body juices are flowing and anger is rising. This can happen. So the employee will begin to respond both emotionally and psychologically in an adverse manner. That's where we have to be very observant and watch what's going on. How about the dynamics of fear? This is big. Dynamics of fear is an advanced issue which needs to be thought out and presented from a physiological and psychological and spiritual dimension. Fear is an automatic emotional response to perceived danger. Fear can be useful. Fear is different from panic. I would note that. Fear is as an automatic emotional response to a perceived danger. Sometimes fear is experienced immediately after the danger is past. The body will respond emotionally and physiologically the same to both perceived danger and real danger. Says number B, fear can be useful. Someone's afraid of drowning, so they learn to swim and respect water. Emotional baggage, which accompanies a stressful situation, may have heightened fears about certain situations. That can be frustrating to an employee. What about fear is different from panic? Panic will normally incapacitate us to the point of doing nothing or surrendering to a situation. How about the 4 systems affected by stress and fear? Page 66.
65 for us.
Okie dokie.
Moving right along.
Let's talk about the 4 systems: the physical system, the behavioral system, the cognitive system, and the emotional system. And it says a chaplain needs to be familiar with these basic symptoms correlating to each system. Okay? Physical. Some of those symptoms can be what?
Fatigue, chest pain, dizziness, and elevated blood pressure or vomiting.
What about behavioral?
Withdrawal and inability to rest, alcohol consumption, suspiciousness, antisocial acts.
Okay, and cognitive?
Confusion, loss of time, disturbed thinking, nightmares, and intrusive images.
And emotional?
Anxiety, panic, fear, depression, feeling overwhelmed.
Anybody ever had these feelings or experience? Okay,
Definitely.
so as a chaplain, you're gonna be more able to understand what people are going through if you've experienced these things yourself. So that's beneficial to have experienced these things. A chaplain's well prepared to give a basic orientation to a stressed employee. So there are things involved such as understanding stress symptoms. You want to understand how symptoms materialize. Understanding usual behavior will be altered. They're not going to act the same. Understand that behavioral changes are not necessarily character changes because they're temporary, all right? They're reactions to a trauma or stress situation. So that, you know, is very likely just going to be a change for that situation only. It's not necessarily gonna alter their character. The next session, critical incident stress debriefing. And hopefully everybody's already read this. You need to know a little bit about the Mitchell method, which is Dr. Mitchell's considered a leading authority on critical incident stress debriefing. He's also written a book about that. And on the next page, there is a diagram illustrating this debriefing. And it's introduction, fact, thought, reaction, symptoms, teaching, and reentry. There's also a note right under the illustration. It says it's important for the community service chaplain to have as complete an understanding as possible about the debriefing process before he or she attempts to facilitate or conduct a debriefing, okay? The chaplain would be well advised to attend a seminar or debriefing in one of Dr. Mitchell's organizations, Church of God, Chaplain's Commission, or other organization which gives comprehensive training on critical incident stress debriefing. So let's talk
I have a
about.
question.
Yes,
How
ma'am.
often would we really use this?
It depends. If you were going to work for, say, a police department, you'd need a lot. Fire department, probably same. So it would depend on where you're gonna be applying your chaplaincy training, right? Visiting people in a hospital, probably not so much.
Now,
You go do like a natural disaster where you help
Yeah, I can see
rebuild
that.
houses.
That's a good one.
So this is for crisis situation.
and there's still, even in a hospital situation, if there's
Somebody got a
conflict,
diagnosis.
true, if there's conflict between family members about whether or not to pull the plug, I mean, you may have to de-escalate some stuff.
Yeah.
If you're working as the hospital chaplain, in our capacity that we would be going in, not so, you know, we could pray with them, ask them to, you know, pardon me?
Yes, you could be, especially if you've been called upon by a known church member.
Yes.
And they get kind of dramatic or shocking news, you could absolutely need to learn to de-escalate.
Yeah.
Okay.
But the debriefing may be more common in a formal environment like a disaster recovery situation. Every time I responded to a disaster working for FEMA or the state, there was always a debriefing. And
Right.
it's about assessing that you covered all the needs. So even if it's not a formal scenario, you definitely need to debrief with yourself and say, did I cover everything? Is there any area that I need to stay in touch long-term or provide another resource? So even though some of the terminology may sound formal, it can be applicable in a lot of situations.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
I'm gonna. I'm gonna try to get through let's talk about the debriefing process. If you read number one, the critical incident stress debriefing, it's talking about an exception in the law enforcement community. Number two, a debriefing is discussion or group meeting with focus on one or more people who have been involved in a critical or traumatic incident. I would read every one of these sections carefully. Number three, there are 7 steps in debriefing. Step 1 is introduction. The introduction part of the debriefing is where one of the facilitators basically sets the ground rules for the session. Okay. Number 2 is the fact phase. I'll let you read what that is.
I'm just writing what you said.
Number 2
Huh?
Step 2. Oh, step 2.
Step 2.
Okay, that was my fault.
Step 2 being, now these are all under debriefing. And this is, number 2 is the fact phase. Step 3 is the thought phase. And it has a disclaimer down there, do not ask the question using the word feel. Step 4 is the reaction phase. And at this point, you're kind of at the emotional apex of the debriefing. Step 5 is the symptom phase. And it needs to be stressed at this point that the debriefers have to have a good knowledge of the symptoms of trauma and stress, and especially if you're going to work in the field of chaplaincy. Step 6 is the teaching phase. This is where it's necessary for the victims of the trauma to understand what's been going on in their mind and body. Very important. They may not know or be able to express the fear regarding these problems and symptoms that they're experiencing.
One of the sentences there that really stuck out to me is teaching them why their body and mind are doing what they are doing is the key to freeing them from many of their problems. I remember my first husband committed suicide, and I had so many different emotions. I couldn't sleep. Just so many things going on. I'd go to sit down, I'd want to get up. I'd lay down, I'd get back up. My body was just not, it was a constant go of my brain. How am I going to take care of these 4 kids? How am I going to do this? How am I going to do that? You know, praying, but I couldn't stop my mind. And so that sentence right there is very important, because I didn't understand what was going on and with me. So that just struck me.
Okay, so we've been talking about the defusing of a critical incident. The step 7 is the re-entry phase, and it says, do not hurry this step. Have victims seek medical and seek counsel if necessary, which kind of alludes to what you were talking about earlier. Okay, so we've gone through all these steps to get to that point, and that's where we determine and tell them that, you know, we're going to ask you to get medical help or seek a counselor. Then it references a key question: can you think of even one good thing which resulted from this incident? Some good things can happen. Defusing is a short intervention lasting 20 to 40 minutes that takes place shortly after a critical incident. Then there's 6 steps and a procedure for defusing. Number 1, introduction. Somebody read what that is.
Make sure that the victim is aware that you're there for them. Physically separate yourself from the usual procedural and investigative issues that normally follow a critical incident. Confidentiality is emphasized. The victim's level of involvement is accepted. Through talking. Though talking is encouraged, it is not forced, and the victim is free to refuse to talk or participate. So I need to clean my glasses.
One thing that jumped out at me is confidentiality is emphasized. Exploration. This is where we ask the victim to describe, what did you just go through? How did this situation go down for you? Under that, reactions. It's important to validate and legitimize reactions. Information. This is where we'd offer normal information on normal reactions to abnormal situations, coping strategies, and stress reduction methods. Be practical. This is where we would offer supportive, concrete services. For example, talking to the family, getting food or drink, provide information such as where they could get help arrange for transportation, arrange for other needs like legal, physiological, and medical. So in the situation you were in, this is where this would take place. Demobilization's a lot like de-escalation, and it probably lasts no more than 15 or 20 minutes. On-scene support. This is an area where on-scene support includes giving coffee, refreshment, encouragement, and confidence. The chaplain will provide support to peers who are obviously distressed and acquaint him herself with overt signs of stress. We have to learn how to recognize these things. How about the 3 increments of stress response? The three principal increments are acute, delayed, and cumulative. We referenced that a little bit earlier. Acute stress syndrome, immediate physiological and/or emotional response to a traumatic event. Delayed stress syndrome. These are the problems come at a later date. This could be from 2 weeks to 3 months. The adrenal high will not subside as needed by the body. Cumulative stress syndrome. This is where it all builds up, teamed with stressors in the victim's daily life and routine. It's the accumulation of stressors. And they need to go through the process of stress management as life's work. That's what we would do. Critical incident stress management. How is stress successfully managed? Who is part of the stress management process? Can stress management be a one-shot item? The chaplain must be able to articulate to the employee or victim that stress management is either a preventative process or a recovery process. By definition, a process requires more than one step. Brings us to the 7 aspects of how to live and cope with stress. Adaptive attitude, something that doesn't come naturally to all people. Talk it out, pain and silence are correlative. The stressed employee will continue to see their life and problem only from one perspective. That perspective may be fatalistic, negative, or otherwise destructive to their well-being. Learn to cope with anger. Anybody ever known someone with an anger problem?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Coping with anger means learning to get hold of it. Anger requires adrenaline to be sustained. Adrenaline carries norepinephrine. It's a chemical that helps us to feel, feeling good, feeling bad. The adrenal flow will cause cognition to short circuit, and the person will basically run on autopilot. Responsibility guilt. This will often stem from being involved in a traumatic event, overwhelmed with self-imposed guilt. Second guessing. Simply Monday morning quarterbacking. I'll let you read the rest. Did I make a mistake? That's kind of part of second guessing, but often stems from reading and hearing press and media accounts of the incident. Also, colleagues who investigate, overview the incident may be inclined to find fault with the victim's judgment. Deal with fear and vulnerability. Living coping with stress will require that the person under stress begin the process of addressing his or her own fears and vulnerability. Page 77. Critical incident teams.
We are 6 minutes.
Okay, I'm gonna bust through this real quick. You'll need to read it. Number one, the purpose of the critical incident teams to support a peer who's just experienced a critical incident. There should be a team coordinator. It helps to have people who have experienced or worked through this type of incidents, personal and professional credibility. All team members should have training about critical incident trauma. All members should have dealt with or resolved their own situations to the point that they can comfortably listen to others' feelings and reactions. Number four, after a critical incident, this could be an officer-involved shooting. It's important not to talk about what happened until after a preliminary investigation. Proceedings are confidential. Here's that word again. If nothing is written down, there's nothing to subpoena. Do not bombard someone with your experience. It's more important to be a good listener. However, a team member can being open and honest and disclosing his or her personal experience may help create an atmosphere of trust and openness that lets the involved person know she is not alone or unique. For ethical and legal reasons, have a mental health professional as a backup resource. At a group debriefing, it's important to have the mental health professional present. It must be remembered the team is a support group, not a bunch of elitists. Stress-related issues for the debriefer. Critical incident stress debriefer has to be a chameleon, be all things to all people. Debriefer must be able to win from the victims trust, confidence, and involvement. Be empathetic. Non-judgmental listener, reassure the victim in their feelings are normal responses to abnormal situations. Peer counselor, mindset of the victim, personalities of the victim. The important issue is learn to ask the right questions. Learn to listen. Talk it out. The victim is to be the talker. The debriefer is to be the listener. A note of importance. When dealing with a shooting incident, it's important to know that there's not as much psychological burden on a shooter when he's told to shoot as opposed to the officer that makes the decision for himself. And finally, the victim of the incident. Take an adaptive attitude. If you help others, you claim self-esteem. You have a need to be needed. Learn to cope with anger. Identify the source. Anger is not always evil. Assess how you deal with anger. Responsibility guilt. People will often want to take the blame for the incident. Understand, we don't always have control over the circumstances of the incident. Second guessing. Know that this is part of our nature. We're all going to do it. Your mind will continue to roll with questions that you may not have answers to. Did I make a mistake? If you did the right thing, well and good. If you did the wrong thing, learn from it. Deal with fear and vulnerability. It's not a sign of weakness. Fear has its benefits. And finally, accept normal emotions, fear, crying, etc. Kind of covered a pretty good chunk, and I would recommend reread it. Things that jump out of you, you may or may not see on the test. It's always a good idea to review the curriculum a couple times before the test, and go ahead and start reading your book, because since we didn't get it until late, we want to go ahead and read it.
Is there a different book for each?
No.
Hey, I have a question.
That's what I was gonna say, does anybody have any questions? Go ahead.
Can I come by the church tomorrow and get the book?
Yeah,
Oh, what-
I'm here 9 to 4.
9 to 4, alright, great, I'll swing by, I'll text you on Messenger